More research from a Career Builder in 2021 found that Generation Z workers will spend an average of 2 years and 3 months in a job, while millennials aged from 20 to 40 years stayed just 6 months more. In comparison, Generation X spent about 5 years in the same job, while baby boomers aged 57 to 75 stayed in their jobs for about 8 years. Vumile Msweli, who's the CEO of Hesed Consulting, joins us now from Johannesburg to discuss further. Good afternoon, Vumile. So lots of job hopping, that's in the United States. Here in Africa, folks are looking for jobs. As far as career transition is concerned, Vumile, and adding value, how does one get more visibility at work?
Okay, so this is not surprise. This is not a big surprise. There's been a massive shift in reshuffling and reprioritizing specifically from those Gen Zs. So in order for them to become more visible, they need to start being able to articulate the value, which is a very far cry from how they actually view employment. They see it as the role of the employer to add value to them as opposed to them adding value to the employer. So that's one of the reasons we're seeing that massive transition away from larger corporates and rather small to medium-sized enterprises who show what value and impact they have on society is starting to help attract that sort of talent from the Gen Zs. Another big challenge that we've got currently in Africa is, of course, we're looking for employment. We're wanting to add value. Our Gen Zs are barely having an opportunity to showcase their value, whilst on the other side of the pond, people are moving around and saying, actually, I don't even think I need this job. Why should I be adding value when you're not adding value to the community as a whole?
And so what about getting paid appropriately for their work? How does one achieve that?
So in looking at what you're actually going to earn, the big thing is demand and supply. What the Americans are currently facing is there's been such a massive restructure and so many people with the max exodus because of COVID and people reevaluating whether they want to continue in that organization. There's been a massive vacuum, meaning that the premium having to be paid for employees has actually increased. That's one of the reasons we are seeing that massive increase over and above the inflation impact. So that's one thing we have to consider there. But when we're looking from an African perspective and actually adding value, your ability to articulate it from a monetary perspective will ensure that you actually get paid. But we have a surplus of people wanting employment. Therefore, what we actually get paid is going to be substantially less. That's one of the reasons I'm constantly encouraging our coaches to make sure that they've got several revenue streams and not just one, because you don't have the luxury of relying on one revenue stream at a minimal cost.
Okay, makes sense. How does one identify, I guess, the organization's pressing needs in order to guide which projects to be a part of?
Well, the first thing is understanding the strategy of your organization. If you understand the strategy, you know where your organization is going and what the demands are going to be of the future. That's one thing. The second thing you have to look at is, where is my organization willing to invest money in? Obviously, a lot of us are looking at business development. How can we grow our book, grow our customer base? So the quicker you can equip yourself with the skills such as sales, business development, that means you're going to be able to add a monetary value to what it is that you do for your employer, which is a lot easier to articulate than, for example, the more soft skills, the more quantitative, the qualitative value that you actually bring. So making sure you understand the strategy, making sure you understand where your employer is currently wanting to invest, having a clear understanding of what's going to be happening in the future allows you to position yourself in order to add value in the future and secure your job today.
Excellent stuff. Is career acceleration better than career progression?
Definitely, specifically for the employee, right? So if we're talking about career acceleration, we're saying you're not going to just take step by step. Progression means every single year you get your small increase, you potentially get a little bit more responsibility, and you slowly climb those corporate steps or ladder per se. But acceleration is saying, where do you want to go in your career? How can you get there in the fastest time possible, in the most efficient manner possible, obviously adding value to yourself as well as your employer, all the while creating a brand that will be well respected well into the future.
And finally, Vumile, how do you see, I guess, where you are, the job market in South Africa? I guess, just your observation, how do you think things are going to play out this year?
Unfortunately, Rotus, I don't have very good news. I think for those trying to get into the market, and unemployment will continue to rise. So if you're finding yourself like a lot of South Africans, potentially retrenched, potentially made redundant, you have to repurpose the skills you have and start looking at potentially putting yourself in the space of entrepreneurship or consulting for self-employment. For those who are in the job market currently and have a niche skill, make sure you are keeping your skill up to date. So if you have the privilege of being a data scientist, which we are in great demand of in the country, or work in the trucking industry where we have a shortage of about 40,000 trucks a year, a month in this country, then make sure you are growing that skill, growing your capability to stay relevant and stay employed. If you're outside, what can you do now in looking at the market to make yourself a little bit more competitive, and don't limit yourself to the geography of South Africa? Can your skill set be exported into Asia, into the Americas, or perhaps into the rest of the continent?
So one has to look globally. Is who's at the advantage here? While we're talking about career acceleration and career progression, is it still an employer's market? If looking at Africa.
Looking at Africa, definitely, if we're looking from a junior to middle management, it is definitely still the employer who's in charge and who's able to really prescribe the rules of the game. But the moment we start getting into the C-suite and high niche, high talent requirements, it starts to become the employee's call. I've been having conversations with some of my clients in the corporate space who will pay any dime that certain talent requires because the shortage is so high. So if you are currently in a space where there's an oversurplus, can you change your skill set and perhaps look at things like data scientists, etc., to actually add value and then become a niche, much required resource that you can start prescribing the rules of the game and, in essence, write your own paycheck.
And Vumile, I just want to add another question here on the perception of Generation Z. I think we had that stat where they are the generation that spends the least amount of time at their jobs compared to Generation X and the baby boomers and millennials. So here we're looking at them. They're the ones who are most likely to leave their current employer over the next 6 months. They're the ones who spend the least amount of time. What do you make of the perception of Gen Z? Are things changing with the younger generation, or are they perceived unfairly? How do you see that?
I think, I'm a millennial myself, and I think our expectation on Generation Z is completely ridiculous. Let's be honest. These people are growing up in an era where they get what they want instantaneously. They're surrounded by their peers who are making vast amounts of wealth in industries that didn't exist last year. So in essence, us expecting them to stay loyal just because it's what works best for you as a business owner is not what they're about. Your ability to articulate your value from a purpose perspective will make your Gen Z stay longer. Your ability to invest in them so they can quickly accelerate will make your Gen Zs stay longer. But also, why do you want them to stay longer? That is the question. Is the skill set that you require from them so rare that you actually need them? And if you do, why is your organization not cultivating a culture that can keep and attract them? We have to realize that Gen Zs are growing up in the gig economy. Them moving around seems very natural. They go forward, sideways, and backwards. The quicker you can cultivate a culture that actually can accommodate them, the more sustainable and secure the future for your business. But you have to make sure you actually are investing in creating that culture. We always say that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we're so focused on the strategy, we're not really making sure that the culture is conducive for our employees who are young, hungry, and ambitious. So the quicker we can do that, because the whole notion of, we've got unemployment in Africa, it can only last so long. Gen Zs, unlike the millennials as much, are very happy to start building their own businesses as opposed to waiting for you to create a seat at the table for them.
Makes a lot of sense. A really changing workspace with the generations. Finally, Vumile, as building skills in the workplace, is that still the be-all and end-all when it comes to career progression versus advancing and so on?
Yes, it is necessary to build capability and skills, but the question is, are the skills and capability you're building actually resonating with your actual employees? So one of the things that I'm now advising clients is to take a look at your current employees, where they're wanting to be, what you're trying to cultivate from a skill and capability perspective. Is it aligned? Or would you rather invest some time in acquiring the right kind of personnel who actually want to grow with your business? We're spending far too much time worrying about the nuts and bolts, as opposed to having strategy conversations and culture conversations that can make sure that as we build in this capability, the people are still there. It makes no business sense to invest in employees that are actually going to leave you next week because there's just not a right culture fit. And in essence, they don't see themselves having opportunities in your organizations. So the culture of you having the same person doing the same role for the past 20 years actually is disparaging and will cost you in the future from a sustainability perspective.
Great stuff. Very, very informative. Vumile Msweli joining us from South Africa, CEO of Hesed Consulting. Thank you so much for talking to us about the changing trends in the workplace across the world. We appreciate your insights.